Exactly what that is, well, this is a little bit of a short lesson. We're going to take a few minutes here towards the end and kind of like we always do, see where you all want to go next, and we'll go from there. We have the last two chapters, chapters 7 and 8, essentially the last kind of scenes of the movie here, this love story that we've kind of been reading through and seeing over the last couple of weeks. And we've have seen Shulamith and Solomon's love, how it kind of got started, how it kind of grew into the marriage. Last week we saw the honeymoon phase kind of being over, and then going through some difficulties and going through some problems, and having some insensitivities towards each other, to where just kind of got tired of being around each other a little bit. Maybe kind of got a little lackadaisical in kind of their affection towards each other, and then how those insensitivities kind of led to a bit of a problem for them for a time in their relationship or in their marriage. We kind of saw towards the end of last week that how they kind of worked through that, how they kind of just come to the realization that they'd become a little bit self-centered, had kind of pulled their focus of the relationship away from God, kind of more placed it on themselves. And then therefore, of course, because of that, when God's not at the center of anything, but especially a marriage or relationship, it's destined to have some problems. And if God's not at the center and is never at the center, it's more than likely destined to fail. So we kind of got into that, and as we finished up with chapter 6 last week, they kind of had the time, maybe the candlelight dinner or whatever it was, where they sat down and kind of hashed some things out, and we're back very much in love and very much working together in their marriage to kind of build a life together, and that's what brings us here to chapter 7. And chapter 7 and 8, the final section here of the sections of the book of Song of Solomon. And what we see is kind of, I told you this, we're going to see their love deepening, their love maturing as they kind of carry out throughout their marriage. They've worked through some problems that we saw last week, and they found out that the true enjoyment, the true joyfulness of their relationship, the true continual growth and love of their relationship is when love is nurtured, when it is grown together, and when, of course, God is stemming from the very middle of that. So that's what we have today. We've got a couple of just different things. We have the delight of marital love, the desire of marital love that we'll look at. Excuse me. We also have the development of marital love, and kind of a couple of things of how they kind of essentially grow old together is pretty much what we're doing here when we see this. So let's look at the first 10 verses of chapter 7, and we're gonna. Remember, they just kind of had the big fight, and now they're back, in love again or whatever, kind of made up or whatever. So we're going to see Solomon here and Shulamith kind of flower each other a little bit more with some compliments, and just kind of showing the delight that these two individuals had for each other within their relationship. And we'll kind of move through this. I'll probably be done a little bit early today. This is not a very long lesson. And a lot of this stuff is kind of things we have seen. We're just kind of building on. Now this is kind of the end result of this. So let's look at the first 10 verses here. And what you're going to be seeing in these 10 verses is Solomon once again describing the beauty of Shulamith. Okay? As a matter of fact, we go through all these 10 verses here. He kind of continues to just give her lots of compliments. He uses some of the same language that he used back in the first part of the Song of Solomon when he was talking about how beautiful and things that she was. And this kind of, they're just delighting in each other, right? They're just enjoying each other's company, enjoying each other's presence here. Let's read through these verses. How beautiful are thy feet, excuse me, with shoes, O prince's daughter. The joints of thy thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of a cunning workman. Thy navel is like a round goblet, which wanteth not liquor. Thy belly is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. Thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins. Thy neck is a tower. Thy neck is a tower of ivory. Thine eyes like the fish pools in Heshbon, by the gate of Bathrabbim. Thy nose is as a tower of Lebanon, which looketh toward Damascus. Thine head upon thee is like Carmel, and the hair of thine head like purple. The king is held in the galleries. How fair and how pleasant art thou, love for delights. This is thy stature, as like to a palm trees, and thy breast to clusters of grapes. I said, I will go up unto the palm tree, I will take hold of thy boughs thereof. Now also thy breast shall be a cluster of vines, and the smell of those like apples. Smell of thy nose like apples. Thy roof of thy mouth like the best wine for my beloved, that goeth down sweetly, causing the lips of those that are asleep to speak. I am my beloved. This is actually Shulamith speaking here in verse 10. I am my beloved, and his desire is towards me. So we see here, right, they've kind of had this time apart, very much back in love now. And as he's speaking to Shulamith here, as he's kind of talking to her, he is continuing to just flower her with compliments, continuing to just tell her how pleasant that she is. And he's using very, very lavish language here, just kind of show his complete delight in Shulamith. And as she answers this, and she gives him, obviously, with this positive response that she gives him in verse 10, about how she is her beloved's and his desire is towards me. She is at this point totally convinced. Now, these two people are totally convinced in their love and their commitment to each other. She belonged to him, he belonged to her, and the love over time had just continued to achieve the oneness in oneness physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And through the years of their relationship and the years of their love they were building together, they had continued to build a love that lasted. In verse 10, we see that Shulamith, again, her response here is that, I'm my beloved's, and his desire is towards me. There's some significance there why that word desire is in verse 10. And it talks about a very special significance at the marital love in God's kind of larger plan. The same word that we see used here in the book of Song of Solomon for desire is actually the same word that is used in Genesis 3 and verse 16. And that's when God is pronouncing the curse on Adam and Eve. Okay. Now, part of the curse, of course, was that the woman would desire her husband, but he would rule over hers. In other words, spiritual separation from God would also bring social separation even within marriages. Because sin can damage, and will damage every part of life. Verse 10, with her using the word desire here, it implies that God has designed marital love as part of his plan. All right? And that his plan to rescue humans from the destructive effects of sin. Now, marriage cannot work if sin and selfishness, those things remain unchecked. If a marriage is to work, if it is to flourish, then this bent to individualism has to be surrendered out of love for the spouse. For a marriage relationship demands the same kind of yieldness, the same kind of surrender that God requires in our relationship with him. Now, marriage cannot save a person, all right? But it can show the bankruptcy of self-centeredness, all right, and the blessedness of submission. So we see, first of all, here, the first 10 verses, the delight of marriage. And we get to verse 11 here down to verse 8 of chapter 4, and we have the desire of marital love. We have the delight of marital love, now we have the desire of marital love. Solomon's words here in loving actions that he is kind of demonstrating here towards Shulamith convinced her that she was desired by him. And in verses 11 through verse 4 here of chapter 8, she responds to Solomon by kind of disclosing her desire for him as well. All right? Their marriage here is one of mutual love, one of mutual enjoyment, and they both found pleasure and fulfillment in the relationship they're nurturing over many years here. Early on in the relationship, of course, if we remember, Shulamith had this kind of uncertainty about her and kind of felt intimidated by Solomon and intimidated by the women that was around her in his court. But as you can see here through the years, how much she had matured, how much their love had matured as well. And Solomon's love had gradually brought her to a place where she was confident, she was secure in her relationship with Solomon. So, again, we see the response here of Shulamith, the desire of love. Let's read verses 11 and 12 here, and kind of see some of her response to him. And it says this is again Shulamith speaking here in verse 11 and 12. Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field. Let us lodge in the village. Let us get up early to the vineyards. Let us see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grapes appear, and the pomegranates bud forth. There will I give thee my love. So she's telling him or responding to him using, again, poetic language, talking about vineyards. She's done this a couple of times now. The vineyards and the blossoms, and how the blossoms bring, the hope for a very, very fruitful time. And she's inviting him to come with him, or come with her to the field, where she, of course, would give him her love. Verse 13, to finish this out, she talks about the mandrakes. The mandrakes give a smell, and at our gate are all manner of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. The mandrakes during this time were considered to be the fruit of fertility. If the mandrake's fruit was good that year, then it would be a very fertile year as well. And the smell of the mandrakes kind of aided in fertility as well and encouraged fertility. So she's applying here to Solomon that let's let our love grow and let's have children and kind of continue to build this life together. Shulamith also added that she had treasured up, all sorts of pleasant things for Solomon. All of our manner of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. She is, their love, their physical enjoyment of each other, it did not grow stale, right? These two people didn't grow stale in their love and their enjoyment of each other. They were continuing to learn about each other, continuing to learn how to enjoy each other more. And as their love deepened and matured over time, therefore the enjoyments took on new dimensions in their relationship. We get to chapter 8. And this verses 1 and 2 here are going to sound a little bit strange at first. Let's read these, and I'll kind of explain what exactly is meant here in these couple of verses. And again, Shulamith still speaking here to Solomon. Verse 8, Oh, that thou wert as my brother, that sucked the breast of my mother. When I find thee without, I would kiss thee. Yea, I should not be despised. I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house, who would instruct me. I would cause thee to drink of spiced wine, of the juice of my pomegranate. Now, she has essentially looked at Solomon and said what in verses 1 and 2? That she wants him to be as what? Oh, that thou wert as my brother. Okay, which, if you read it at face value, seems kind of something weird that she would say to him. But this is the reason she expresses it in this way. Now, during this time era, okay, it was looked down upon in society for a man and a woman to be affectionate with each other in public. Okay, that was something that just didn't happen. That was something that the people thought was very, very bad and not very classy, and they wouldn't do those things. But during this time, it was very much accepted for family members to be very affectionate with each other when they saw each other in public. A hug or a kiss or whatever it was, that was a very, very socially acceptable thing to do. So what she is saying is she's desiring Solomon to be able to display her love to him, not just in private, but also in public all the time. It's killing her that she can't, show him affection while they're in public. She wants to take him away into the house and she can, show her affection there, but she's also wanting to show her affection for him in public. It's just, again, her way of describing to him how much she is enjoying the life that they are growing together. Right? She wanted to be able to secure a private place in her mother's house in verse 2 where she could show affection, and she also wanted to be able to do it out in public, just kind of telling Solomon how much she was in love with him and how much she wanted to continue to grow in their relationship. And in verse 3 of chapter 8, she actually repeats something to Solomon, which is the very first wish she had uttered to him way back in Song of Solomon chapter 2 and verse 6. And she says in verse 3, His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me. Remember back in chapter 2, she was wanting him to do the same thing. She was desiring him to do these same things. And now, even later on in life, they've been married for some time, she still has this same desire. And she still wants him to be able to embrace her and to be able to hold her. Verse 4, Solomon responds to her, and it says, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you stir not up for awake my love until he please. Which is the same thing that he has said to her now several times when they've kind of had this same conversation. All right, we get to verse 5 of this chapter, and this is kind of what the bulk of this will be, and this is how their love now develops. We've seen them delighting in it, we've seen them desiring it, now we can see how they're going to develop this love. It's easy to say, husband and wife should grow in love together, and that should be wonderful marital bliss, and things should be great. There are going to be some rocky times, but for the most part, things should be fine. And then just kind of leave it at that. Now go figure it out. Well, that's not the case here. Solomon and Shulamith, God's design was for them to grow old together, and then he also, we can see here, gives them some of the guidelines, or we see some of the guidelines through their life of how to develop marital love. And let's go to verse 5 first. Now, this is a narrator. This is not Solomon or Shulamith, either one, speaking here. This is a narrator describing a scene that he's seeing here. So, who is it that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? I raised thee up under the apple tree, and there thy mother brought thee forth. There she brought thee forth that bare me. So again, we see here the narrator speaking of Shulamith was kind of speaking here in tender terms of the awakening love that she and Solomon are sharing with each other. Right? They're reflecting on the role that Solomon's mother had in bringing him into the world. All right, who is it that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? Now, Shulamith here is implying that their love was part of God's larger work in the world. In one sense, their love was exclusive, reserved for just the two of them, and not truly independent. All right, they are indebted here to their parents who had given them life and had taught them how to love. Like Shulamith and Solomon, every loving couple is indebted to many people who have sacrificed for them and shaped their lives. Now, there is an eternal dimension to human love. On one hand, love draws from the past through parents. All right. On the other hand, love also invests in the future through children. And as Solomon and Shulamith knew, a loving family environment can contribute much to a person's preparation for marriage. So when the narrator says, who is it that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon my beloved? I raised thee up under the apple tree. There thy mother brought thee forth, and she brought thee forth that bare thee. So this is referring to the environment in which Solomon and Shulamith both grew up in, and how they had had some examples from their parents of how love should be, and how they can pass that on to their children. Now, that is a very good lesson for all of us, right? As I have seen my parents in their marriage, and Haley has seen her parents in their marriage, and how we now is going to be starting our own family. Now we need to take those lessons that we've learned and then pass those on to our children so that they can have that same effect on their children, and we can see how this dimension of this godly-centered love should continue to go through generation and generation. And it's the same thing that we should be passing on. And just as Solomon and Shulamith are indebted to a certain degree with the examples that they had on how to love, they should also be passing those things on. So the development of their love together is also the fact that they can show the importance of being a good, godly example of what a union between a man and a woman should be, as they are passing it through on to their kids. The eternal love, there's an eternal dimension to human love. And it's important that to Solomon and Shulamith here, that they're showing a loving family environment and how that can contribute very much to a person's preparation for marriage. So we see the seed of love. Okay, is what we'll call that. We'll call that planting the seed of love. Verses 6 and 7, we see here that the seed of love is then planted in commitment. The seed of love is planted in commitment. Verse 6, set me a seal upon my heart, as a seal upon thy arm, for thy love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would utterly be contemned. So we see there, Shulamith had found love to be deep, found love to be powerful, found love to be a powerful emotion that has to be rooted in commitment. And in verses 6 and 7, we see that she uses 4 different figures of speech for what love is like. And this is the guideline, okay, on how love should be grown in marriages and in relationships. The first one is this, okay? The first of the 4, we get the seed of love that we've seen. We're going to plant that seed of love in commitment, and these are kind of the guidelines, or not. I don't want to say steps, but I want to say things that relationships, things that marriages will go through and should have to be able to grow themselves in love. If I'm making sense of what I'm saying, okay? The first one is this. She speaks in verse 6 of a seal. All right, she says, set me as a seal upon thine heart. Now, she speaks as love here as being a seal of the heart or on the arm. And during this time, there was actually an actual seal that was worn. Most of the time, of course, on a ring, on a hand, or across on a necklace. And it was used to mark the integrity of legal papers, right? We've all seen the seal that's been stamped in movies and different things. Had the king's seal on it. And it was a sign of integrity and a sign of, that's how they marked all their papers and different things they were doing. In Esther, it was a very, very valuable possession, right? The seal was a very valuable possession. And Shulamith here is referring to love like this type of seal, okay? And what it identifies, firstly, is this: total commitment. Total commitment. So we see verse 6, set me as a seal upon thine heart. Total commitment to the relationship. Total commitment to the marriage. Total commitment is the desire of the heart. And with the full power of life, true love is a lasting commitment. Can someone really pledge his or her love while also requiring his or her future spouse to sign some type of agreement in case their love doesn't last? What do prenups, right? We all know what a prenuptial is. What do prenuptial agreements do to the commitment level of marriages before marriages even begin? So there's not much commitment there. Secondly, we see this in verse 6. We see love, growing in love. We see commitment. The second one is this, and it's persistence. Commitment and persistence. Verse 6, and for the love is as what? Strong as death. She likens love to the seal. She also likens love to death. Now, a little bit strange of a comparison here at first. All right, but what she's doing, she's using the fact that love is irreversible and persistent. Just as death comes to all, so love keeps moving forward despite all of the efforts to cut it off. The next phrase here is jealousy is as cruel as the grave. And it indicates that love can be intense, and the love pictured here is willing to fight for the one it loves. It's not easy, it's not a painless emotion, but true love holds on and does not go. So growing in commitment, growing in love together, there's going to be commitment there, and there has to be persistence. The third thing is this in verse 7. Shulamith here compares a love to a powerful fire that can't be extinguished. Verse 7, many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. Love is marriage, commitment, persistent. The third one here is tested. Love may be severely tested by trouble, severely tested by difficulties, but true love will triumph. And the last one is in the last part of verse 7. It says, not the floods, neither can the floods drown it. If a man were to give all the substance of his house, it would utterly be contemned. And the fourth one here is that love is priceless. True love is priceless. Even if a man were to give all his wealth and all of his effort to purchase love, he would find that love is not for sale. Real love requires commitment. One cannot negotiate for it or bargain for it. Love must be given freely and received freely. In fact, the person who vainly tries to buy love is despised and scorned. He has completely missed what it is about. The last couple verses here that finish up this, we get, first of all, we kind of go back and talk some more about Shulamith and how she was prepared in her purity for the relationship that she had with Solomon. We have a little sister here, verse 8, and she hath no breast. What shall we do for her, our sister, in the day when she shall be spoken for? Verse 9, if she be a wall, we will build upon her a place of silver. If she be a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. I am a wall, and my breasts like towers, that when I was in his eyes, I was the one that found favor. Solomon had a vineyard at Balaam, but he let out the vineyard unto the keepers. Every one of the fruit thereof was to bring 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard, which is mine, is before me. Thou, O Solomon, must have 1,000, and those that keep the fruit thereof 200. This is referring back to how this is actually Shulamith's brothers here, and how they were also invested in guarding her purity, and how they kind of taught her the lessons of how important it was to guard her purity until she was married. And of course, we saw Solomon found favor in that because of that whole thing, and that was a reference back to that. And then the last two verses here to finish this up is the pleasures of fruitfulness. In verses 13 and 14, thou that dwellest in the gardens, the companions hearken to thy voice, cause me to hear it. Make haste, my beloved, and be thou like a roe to a young hart upon the mountain of spices. Final two verses here, kind of parting glimpse of this loving couple through their challenges, through their changes, through the different things and problems that may have came into the relationship. Solomon and Shulamith had learned to love deeply and to love tenderly. Their affection had not faded into lifeless routine. Their whispered words revealed they had learned the secret of married love. They had come to experience the reality that physical intimacy in marriage is a good and sacred gift from God. And Solomon was not the only one who enjoyed listening and being with, or not only one enjoyed listening to Shulamith. Her loving spirit brought joy to all those who heard it as well, and she blossomed into a lovely person. So we can see here through the book of Song of Solomon of kind of God's plan on how a man and a woman, or how for dating, for courting, or going steady, whatever you want to call it, I guess, how that should just continue to progress, how he should be at the center of it, how he should continue to be at the center of our marriages, how he should continue to be the center of all relationships, not just our the loving relationships we have, but just our professional relationships, personal relationships that we have. All of those things God should be and should continue to be at the center of it, because He has set up the institution of marriage for us to delight in. And He's also given us these things that we've seen in Solomon, the book of Song of Solomon here, of how to continue to grow our love and continue to mature in our love as we progress through life. Okay, so that has been our study on the books that Solomon wrote. We finished that up there with the Song of Solomon, and I hope that it has been somewhat informational and enjoyable to you. Okay, let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for our study here on the book of Song of Solomon, and what we were able to see with these two individuals, and how we were able to kind of watch them properly progress through the relationship, Lord, in a way in which was honoring and pleasing unto you. And how when they kind of got away from that, there were some difficulties as they got back to that, Lord. the difficulties kind of subsided, Lord, and we pray that's the same for us, as an example to us, for what we should be doing in our relationships as well. I pray for Pastor Rob as he comes in the next hour as well, Lord, that you'll just use him in a mighty way to keep us attentive, Lord, with our ears and our hearts, Lord, more importantly, so that we can take, listen, and apply to our own lives. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, before